welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, founder and director of Intuitive Interim and Executive Search. Throughout this series, I will be sharing engaging conversations with talented leaders from across the UK transport sector. Hello and welcome to Intuitive Insights podcast with my guest this week, Neil Holm, Managing Director of the Transpennine Route Upgrade. The TRU, as it is known, is the multi-billion-pound railway programme that will better connect passengers in the north between Manchester, Huddersfield, Leeds and York. Neil's had a fascinating career history to date, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Neil Holm, Managing Director of Transpennine Route Upgrade, a very warm welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. I am really looking forward to this conversation. I've had a sneaky look at your LinkedIn profile and I am blown away by the jobs that you've done and the programs of work that you've been focused on. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how does somebody, I'm not going to steal your thunder, so I'm not going to mention any of them, but when I sort of saw the list and I was kind of like, how does somebody get to work on this many things of kind of huge magnitude? So I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to hand over to you. I would love to know your career story. Where did it start? Where have you been? And what you're doing now? Tell us about TRU. Over to you.
So I'll probably just introduce my job right now, and then I'll get to how did I end up here. So I'm the managing director of something called the Transpennine Route Upgrade. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's one of the biggest rail programs in the UK, and actually one of the biggest infrastructure programs in the UK. Over £10 billion, upgrading all the railways between Manchester and York, and massively transformational for the north of England, a real generational opportunity. But we'll get to that. But I'll talk about how did I end up here. So Neil Holm, married to Catherine with two children, Elliot and Imogen, which are 8 and 7, that are sort of key parts of how did I get here and what makes me me. But if I start with the career story, so I grew up near Glasgow. I left school in 5th year, and I left school in 5th year because I thought it was really clever, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to university. This is going to be fine. And I'll pick up maybe in those early days some really seminal moments that probably changed my whole life and ended up staying with me in my career that I'm with now. So I joined Strathclyde University. I did chemistry. I did chemistry because I was quite good at it. I thought, well, this can't be too difficult. And about 2 years in, I found out I was pretty rubbish at it. And I was rubbish at it for two reasons. Not because I wasn't bright enough to do it, but because I wasn't really that into it. And actually, I wasn't putting that much effort into it. So just a moment where I'm number one in those university years was I spent a whole summer going, what am I going to do in my life? I'm nowhere near as good as I thought I was. I wasn't getting the grades that I should have been in, and I was probably heading in some way, shape or form to dropping out of university. So huge amount of reflection, a lot of support from my parents and decision making. And I went back a year and I did mechanical engineering. And it was one of the greatest things I've ever done. I got great grades. It just clicked. It was just something that just really got me out of bed in the morning. And it is something I've still got a huge passion for is engineering. And then the next thing was probably about 3rd year, I went to Canada to work. Now, on reflection, I did absolutely no planning whatsoever for this trip to Canada. Right. And I turned up in Vancouver with a visa going, right, where's my job? And they said, you need to go find a job. And I was like, right, okay. And to make matters worse, I went to work somewhere called Whistler, which is a sort of ski resort up in the mountains that nobody went to. Right. And I probably spent 3 or 4 weeks there with no work. It just rained the whole time. I thought, I'm going to run out of money. I'm going to have to come home. And it just clicked. And the sun came out. I ended up getting a job in a 5-star hotel, basically running the front house, doing valet parking. It was like Ferris Bueller's Day Off was every day. And I had the best summer. But what that really taught me was you're on your own. That was the first time my career was like, you're on your own. You need to do this. Somebody's not going to do it for you. And that taught me a lot. It was a great summer, but it was very, very tough start to that. And then the last one was I did a postgrad at Cambridge, something called the Advanced Course in Design, Manufacturing and Management, which was just this incredible course. It was some of the best people in the country coming to teach you, very industry based. You did 8 projects. You went to Japan. You went to Australia to visit companies. But that course fundamentally, changed me. But the way I got onto that course, I thought was interesting. That wasn't the learning was the course. I learned a lot from it, but the way I got into it was really interesting. Somebody came from Cambridge to say, "Come and join this course. Come and apply." And I applied, did the interview, got in, which was a little bit surprised about and very pleased about. But I eventually found out I was the only person from Strathclyde who applied for that course, even though they spoke to loads of people, and loads of people said,
"Right,
this is a great thing to do." And I think what I learned from that is if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you don't put yourself forward for things, nobody else is going to do it for you. And, that sort of challenge to say, well, you might not know what the answer is and it might be scary, but just put your hand up and go, and, it'll probably end up being a great experience.
Yeah.
And actually,
big learning point, that, isn't it?
Massive.
Because and it kind of speaks as well, I think, to this imposter syndrome that lots of people talk about, where it's like, well, I'm not good enough for that. Why should I? Why, it's Cambridge, bloody hell, even the title of the course, I'm kind of like, whoa, right, okay, what's that all about? But you're absolutely correct. If you don't ask, you don't get. And what's the worst thing that can happen? You don't get accepted, and you're no worse off than you were before.
Yeah, and I think that's so the Cambridge was half Cambridge undergraduates, half other universities. And I think the difference between those two is the weight of expectation. If you're an undergrad, is you expect to go and be successful.
Yeah.
It gets drilled into you. And that doesn't happen everywhere else. So having confidence in yourself and actually taking a risk. When you're 20 odd, you think, oh, this is a big risk. It's not a big risk. You don't have kids. You don't really need a big salary. All those things that life catches up with you later in life. You're not, when you can't knacker your career because you don't have one. So what's the worst that can happen? So that was great, fabulous learning. And then I joined a company called BAE Systems, which probably a lot of people have heard of. I joined the aerospace division up in Wharton to do a 5-year project management graduate scheme. And that was, a great opportunity. And lots of people were doing business stuff, trying to really chase a career. And I said, well, why did I come here? Well, I came here to build aeroplanes.
Right.
And had some really great mentors, some really, really, really great mentors. So I'm still in contact with some of them, actually. And 2 things happened. I got to basically be the project engineer. I thought I was a project manager, but I was really the project engineer at aircraft called IPA-5, which was the very first production development aircraft for Typhoon. For the single seats, there'd been twins before that, and that was like, well, wow, this is how we build airplanes and get them out the door. And then a few years later, they were building the Tranche 2 flight test aircraft, and they asked me to come back and do that. And that, I think, was my first real experience of you're responsible for this team. I had a probably integrated team of about 30 or so people, and you're responsible for making this happen. And I think that was my first experience of what I call true project leadership, where it's quite a lonely place, but you can also really see this is how you can really make a difference. I remember standing on a flight line at Wharton. We're trying to do a big test with this aircraft out in the flight line, try to run the engines, and on a Friday afternoon, and everybody wanted to go home and go golfing or go to the pub. I was just, can you just stay for another 2 hours? Because I knew if we got 2 hours, if we finished that test, you'd probably save another 3 or 4 days the following week.
Right.
And I think out of that, for me, how do you get people to really engage and really commit?
Yeah.
How do you make the most of every single day? These big programs that we're on, and TIU is exactly the same. It's not generally the big stuff. It's about winning every day, as opposed to, some big bang event. Now there are a few of those which we'll probably get to when I talk about the carrier program. But that was great, and seeing the aircraft you probably spent 2 years building and testing fly for the first time is just an incredible experience.
Sense of achievement. There are so many things that we do in life, aren't there, and so many jobs that we do where you don't get to see the end result because you're working on a part of it. And you don't see what happens at the end. It's kind of why I used to, back in the day, one of my things at a weekend was to bake a cake. Because that sense of satisfaction from having a load of ingredients to doing it, to then seeing it sat on the cake stand at the end, it felt like this is the only bit of kind of completer finisher bit that I'm getting at the moment, because everything else we're not getting there. That I'm really interested, just to kind of pick you up on that, getting everybody to stay 2 hours later. And I have no doubt that they did. But what is it about your style of leadership that meant the people were happy to stay for that 2 hours when they all wanted to go off and go to the pub and go golfing, etc.? What is it about you that got them to stay? How did you engage?
I think first you got to know people. So you got to, when you really have to get commitment and put your foot in the gas, you've got to know people. So I knew everyone really well. I spent a huge amount of time doing what I call visible leadership, where you're out speaking to people, what's going on, finding out what, it's not about formal reviews with these individuals. I used to at the weekends when the team were in, when my wife makes this story about, is it time for you to make bacon rolls? And when I used to ask the team to come in at the weekend, I used to get up early and make them all bacon rolls. There's only a team, maybe 10 people or something, and bring them in. And she said, why are you doing that? I said, because it's my job to keep everyone in the boat. She says, I'm not going to contribute very much on a Saturday morning, but they are. And, they should know that I understand and value it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you put all that credit in as you go along, and you have the relationships, you commit to people. So when you really need to put your foot in the gas, and I've got quite an extreme version of this story that there's a video on YouTube on, actually. Then you can make that moment, because sometimes those moments, they're the real difference between success and failure.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I learned that actually your leadership intervention can make a huge difference. You're not doing it. I mean, I don't really do any work. I mean, don't tell my boss that. But there is a point as a leader you need to intervene and but support people, because these are scary things to do.
Yeah.
So I think knowing people, being really clear on the purpose, but also being clear on the implications. So a little bit more effort on a Friday, we could end up with 3 days of effort. Airplanes are quite fickle. So once you shut them down, they generally don't want to restart particularly easily on the Monday. You come back Monday morning, the gremlins have been in over the weekend, and there's problems all over the place.
Right.
So that once it's running, you need to be out there testing. Interesting enough, I ran a big EMC trial about the same time, and sort of electromagnetic trials. They're very difficult because of different factions you have to bring together. A lot of very, very clever people, and then very operational, and they tend to run for a long time. And my director said, well, what do you need to run this? What do you need to succeed? I said, I need a food budget. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, everybody's on different shifts. Now, I can spend the next 3 months talking to unions about how we realign everybody's shift patterns. Or we can just feed everybody in the morning. There's 2 shift patterns. We have an early shift and a late shift. We just feed everyone in the morning, breakfast, and we'll feed dinner to everybody at night. And everybody will have their breaks at the same time. Yeah. And I was spending, I don't know, £4,000 a month in takeaways.
Right.
But, it's been one of the biggest defence programmes in Europe. And
exactly, it's all relative, isn't it? It's absolutely relative. But if it gets it over the line on time and in budget overall, then it's worth it, isn't it? Absolutely worth it.
Treating people well and looking after them, and feeding people is probably the cheapest way you can get people engaged.
Yeah.
And the armed forces are Royal Navy are great at this. Feeding people is a big part of the job.
Yeah, I love that.
So that was Typhoon. That was great. And then I did some. So I did 5 years in Munich in Eurofighter, running the supply and construction side of this Saudi Typhoon program.
Yeah.
And that was just such a great experience. I mean, firstly, myself and Catherine were in Munich with no kids and the lifestyle you have out there, which was great. And I'm sure everybody thought I was out there on holiday, but it was a tough job, a lot of pressure. To support the Saudi program, but hugely diverse, and it totally challenged and dispelled the unconscious biases you would have around different cultures. I mean, my team was Italian, Spanish, Germans, and Brits,
right.
And it was fabulous. And we did a good job, and the way that we worked together and the way we were diverse was a real eye opener for me. And that experience of collaboration, basically leaving your parochial stereotypes at the door in order to lead very diverse teams, led me on to my next program, which was to join the aircraft carrier program. So I remember speaking to one of my mentors at that time. I said, well, what do you do next? He said, they need good people on carrier. That's a tough program. I said, okay, that sounds good. And I said, well, I don't know much about shipbuilding. I said, but you know a lot about collaboration. And that mindset on collaboration was really important. But and carrier was tough. Basically it brought together the three main competing defence companies in the UK and said, you need to go and build this thing the UK's never built before. Really that quite an incredible machine, the aircraft carriers. So I joined the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier program. At much personal risk. I left the domain that I understood. I took a pretty big demotion. I took a job that, quite frankly, wasn't really a job. And probably spent 6 months going, well, why did I do that? And then a little bit like the Canada experience, it came good. So I was made head of program for Queen Elizabeth. Worked for the project director there, a fabulous guy called John Pearson. We basically pulled together the one team that delivered Queen Elizabeth, and that was a really exceptional team. And I can't take credit for that. There was a huge amount of effort in the preceding years of people pulling all that together, but it had to come together for Queen Elizabeth, and it was a real bumpy road. But and I sat and worked on that for John and ran the program for John till just before sea trials. And then I would love to have gone through that phase of sea trials, but they pulled me off to go and basically be the program director for Prince of Wales. Now,
so you'd done something right.
I'd done something right, yeah. I mean, we reshaped the program. We got the machine to work. We got the way of pulling together such a complex organisation, a complex product. We got that to work. Now, Queen Elizabeth had huge numbers of challenges. But actually, it got delivered on schedule. It works. The Navy use it. It's a good piece of kit. It's a good piece of kit, and that was a very, 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 very tough program. Very tough. So Prince of Wales. I think in your career, when you get offered the job, that comes under the category of a development opportunity.
Yeah.
In reality, it's a hospital pass. Yeah. When we picked up that job, there was no time and no money. You get a little letter and they go, well, there's no more time, there's no more money. And we needed to take about a year off the schedule to deliver on contract.
Right.
So in comparison to Queen Elizabeth's schedule, we needed to take about a year off it. And we just did some really radical things that nobody had ever done before. We held our nerve. We undocked the ship. So I'll tell that little story. We undocked the ship at Christmas 2017, it would have been. And there's a great video of this on YouTube. I think it's Prince of Wales float off or something like that.
Right.
And that is the most stressful evolution of my entire career. We undocked that ship on the last half hour of the last day of the year. We could have done it. And if we hadn't done that, we would have lost 3 months to the entire program because of the weather. When you move these big aircraft carriers like a huge sail, you need 9 tugs to do it. And the weather, basically through January, February, March, wouldn't have allowed us. You have to get perfect tides, perfect weather.
Yeah.
In Rosyth in the winter.
Good luck with that.
You don't have much light either in the winter, so that makes it a bit tricky. So, and it was going great. It was going great. We had this strategy. We said you can't undock a ship like that in the middle of the winter. And it was going great. All the preparations, we were ready. This is about the 14th of December, and then we found a problem with one of the seals on the shaft. So there's an emergency seal that goes around the shaft, and we couldn't get that to seal properly. And what we actually did. We flew in somebody from Canada to come and fix it. We brought in loads of spares. We restarted the factory that makes them. And then by about the 18th, 19th, we're refixing these seals. And we're on to, I think it was in Norway, is a company that makes the seal. So we can't get this to seal. What do you think it is? And this is we've got about 1 day left before, we're blown. Yeah. Right. And they said, it might be the metal bit of the seal. So there's a rubber bit in the metal bit. They said, go and find this Loctite 220, put it in the metal bit, it'll suck it in, and that'll seal it. So I had somebody driving around 5 trying to find Loctite 220. Remember it very clearly. That would have been the evening of the 18th, maybe.
Right.
And we said, right, we'll get this stuff. And then I sent everybody home. And they said, well, we're going to undock this. So this is the moment we had to keep everyone in. Everybody going home for Christmas except for the team doing it. And everyone's going, we're going to do this, Neil. And said, look, the weather's perfect. I've ordered the tugs from Aberdeen. They're coming. Let's just see if we can win every hour for the next 3 days. It's a 3-day evolution.
Right.
And everybody stayed. Everybody was totally committed. We got it to seal, which was great. Lloyd signed it off. And in the next 3 days, we probably had 1 or 2 hours of wriggle room in the whole 3 days.
Right.
And everything, the team effort was just incredible. And that was a seminal moment. That's what pulled the team together. So the mantra from the team that stayed was never give up.
Right.
And for everybody who went home before we did it, a lot of cynical people have never happened. You'll never do that. When they came back, this 65,000 ton, 280 metre ship was somewhere else. So when they came back from Christmas, it was somewhere else, and we moved it. And that was the moment that made that team. That was the moment, and you need those moments to make the team. You need the we can do anything sort of moments. And that was great.
Do you know when something like that, and I can get a real sense just from how you're describing it, this kind of real sense of massive achievement and that whole team pulling together, and this philosophy that you have around winning every hour. You haven't got an hour to waste. You haven't got half an hour to waste. Every hour's got to make a difference. When it's done, how do you celebrate? What happens then? What's the kind of like, all right, we've done it now then? What happens?
That year we went home for Christmas. So we got Christmas. But you do need to celebrate, and we would do things like we did a hog roast in the hangar with the team. So all the leadership team gave out 2,000 hog roast rolls over lunchtime. So we would do quite, in the summer we would give out ice creams. So we'd find an event. And
feeding people again.
Well, and thank people. Family days as well. Family days as well. And I think it doesn't need to be a huge amount to recognise people. They need to be recognised for it. So and then a lot of visible leadership was a big part of my leadership style. I was going out to speak to people and thanking them for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And then in any programme, people are naturally committed to these things. They're incredible things to do. TRU is an incredible things to do. But if nobody ever says thank you, then how do you know?
Exactly. I'm really keen to talk about TRU, obviously, and our audience will be really keen to hear about it. Before we do that, can I just ask you, I want to go back to this name that you've mentioned, John Pearson, that you worked for. You've given us some context around your own leadership style. You've acknowledged that mentors have been really important to you throughout your career. What did you learn from John?
I think John was, he's ex-Navy. I think he runs Portsmouth now, but hugely really good at pulling the team together, but also really good at pulling them together in adversity.
Right.
So it never goes well in these big programs. Even when you deliver well, you've gone through 100 different problems to get there, and that sort of leadership style with quite a lot of humour and fun,
right,
around how do we deal with some really difficult, horrible issues. It was also really great, and I take this away. My leadership style is when you ask people to do scary things. I don't mean scary as in dangerous. We don't ask people to do dangerous things, but scary things as in we're not sure if we can achieve this.
Yeah.
Putting your arm around them to go, it doesn't matter if we don't achieve it, but we'll never achieve it unless we try.
Yeah.
And that sort of support. I had a very similar boss on Prince of Wales who did a very similar thing, which is, you'll never excel unless you try the hard stuff.
Right.
And I've been lucky to have quite a few bosses. I've had a few not like that as well. But
and we learn from them as well, don't we?
Well, yeah. I mean, you learn from them. Say, I'm never going to behave like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't like the way that individual made me feel. So, yeah, and that, the insight there is leadership really does make a difference.
Yeah.
You can have all the process and the plan and everything else, but unless somebody steps up and leads and helps, then these big programs don't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking of big programs, then you've done the Prince of Wales, and then from there, how do you end up where you are now?
How do you end up? Yeah, I mean, I reflected on that question because I'm not sure I've got a great answer, and I think there's a couple of things. I finished in the 19 on Prince of Wales, and I thought, well, what do you do after you've done an aircraft carrier? It was this magical program that I have. Rose tinted spectacles about now. It was horrible, a lot of it when we did it, but right. Rose tinted spectacles now. But you think for you to get out of bed in the morning, you kind of got to do something different.
Exactly.
I did quite a lot of work with the Queensferry Crossing team. When we did carry, we did a lot of sharing with them. I thought, well, that's interesting. And I didn't want to get out of big program management. And I also have a view that if you truly are, a world-class program leader, then you should be able to do it in any domain.
Mm.
So I thought, well, this came up. I thought, well, that's pretty incredible. And it ticks a lot of boxes of things that would get me out of bed in the morning. And it's quite different. It's quite different. So TRU came up and thought, well, that's fascinating. And railways are fascinating. So they have quite an intoxicating mix of quite heavy construction activities, but also quite a lot of high technology. And they're hugely complex. I mean, TRU as a job, I would argue is the most complex construction job in the country. Now, I'm sure if you run Hinkley Point HS2, you'll challenge it. And I think that technically they are right. Hinkley Point or HS2 is technically a far more challenging base than what we've got. But we're trying to do it on a live railway. Yeah. So we have to put the railway back every night and every weekend. And the guy who worked for me, his analogy was you're trying to do open heart surgery on a marathon runner while they're running.
God, yeah, that's a good analogy. Yeah,
but doing it well is an incredible thing, and it's also got a lot of technology, and then you've got the connectivity to communities and the people. And when we get it right, it makes a difference to people. But when we get it wrong, it makes a difference to people as well. Now, on other programs I've had, when you get it wrong, you close the doors and you can scratch your head and you go, how are we going to fix this? And when we get it wrong, the clock starts ticking and you're going, well, the railway reopens in 6 hours. Better get on with it.
Pretty hard stop there.
Yeah. So it has totally different challenges. So why TRU? I mean, it's an incredible program. It make a huge difference to millions of people, and it has levels of complexity that challenge me mentally. Really challenge you in terms of both your ability and your leadership style.
Yeah.
So it's a fabulously wickedly complex problem to solve.
Is there anything that surprised you about the railway?
I think there's lots and lots of things. Firstly, this question surprised me.
Sorry,
but secondly, there's a lot of common stuff. I think how you do things.
Yeah.
But the railway is wickedly complex.
Yeah.
So if you don't know much about it, you can sit looking like, well, that's not complex. It's some steel rails, it's some signaling, it's some wires up in the air. Getting it all to work together, that's really complex. Mm. And then building it over 80 miles, which is what TRU is, that's really, really tough. So the more, every day I look at it and go, this is surprisingly complex. Mm. But if you can crystallize it down into small little chunks that are quite simple. And that's the challenge. The challenge for us is how do you make it simple and efficient even though the whole was quite big and complex.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, we'll be really successful. So that the I wouldn't say it surprised me, but I've been pleasantly surprised. It was quite an easy transition personally because the people are great.
Right.
You know, lots of people are inquisitive about where you've come from, quite respectful, and very supportive. You know, I came in knowing absolutely nothing about it, and compared to people who've always worked on railway, I still know nothing about it.
Yeah.
But they're, you know, as long as you behave the right way, people are very, very helpful and supportive. And I've found it a really welcoming environment. They call it the railway family, and it truly is. People look after each other.
Yeah.
I also think because it's a tough environment, I don't think there's a tougher environment on land. Maybe Standfast possibly doing farming, but you know, working at night, working at weekends, out of hours, in the cold and the rain, up in the Pennines. That's a tough job, you know. So people look after each other, and I think it's a great environment like that, and it's a great thing to do. It's a great thing to do because, you know, the railways are the fabric of how we run the country, how people get about. So,
and that for me is kind of a fundamental difference in terms of the huge things that you've done before, because we wouldn't, you know, kind of Joe or Joanne public wouldn't be seeing a fighter plane or an aircraft carrier. But what you're building now and the legacy of what you're in charge of and the team that you're working with are putting together, it's real legacy stuff. You can take Elliot and Imogen to see that and say, yeah, your dad did that. You know, it's massive, isn't it? Because it does affect society, the communities that are along the route, and actually the lives of the people that are involved in actually making it happen as well. So it's far-reaching. The impact is so far-reaching, and I guess the reason behind the question, in relation to the railway, for me, so I'm kind of 10.5 years, but to your point, you know, I'm still very much the new girl in many ways in relation to my experience of working with the industry. I didn't know how complex it was until I joined. I'm doing a completely different job to you, obviously. For me, the biggest, most wonderful thing about it is the people. It's the passion that people have for what they do is incredible. And I chaired an event, a Women in Rail event a few months ago, and some of your team were there. We had Suzanne Mathieson was there, Hannah Lomas was there, and we were having this discussion around major programmes. And what each and every person who contributed, so there was some people there from the programme at Crewe as well, every single panel member and each question that the audience asked, what we all realised by the end of the 2-hour session was this is all about the people. Yes, there's bits of track, and yes, there's some innovative technology, and there's all of that other stuff that's going on, but ultimately it's about the people that are delivering it. And so much that you're sharing with us around leadership and team is critical, isn't it?
Absolutely, and in terms of safety, in terms of how we do it, I mean, fundamentally, the railway's hand built. I mean, I know we have lots of machinery we bring in and put track down in tampers and make it more efficient, but it's a construction job. It's fundamentally, it doesn't pop out of factory. There's no robots that do it. You know, it is a hand built piece of work, and you need people to be really good at it and work well at it to make it work. But you also need the same for them to be safe.
Yes.
And it is a very, very hazardous environment. So if people don't look after each other and they don't work well, then it becomes unsafe. And that's a huge anxiety. If you think of what do I lose sleep at night, that's number one thing.
That's it. Yeah, understandable. So moving on to the next part, the middle bit in the podcast conversation. What are your 3 wishes, Neil? Having been in, and I think this is interesting in relation to, because you, as you say, you're relatively new into the industry, so you will be seeing things with a different perspective, and also because you're potentially then comparing it with different industry sectors that you've worked in. If I gave you 3 wishes, what would you want to be different?
I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? You don't want to waste your 3 wishes, and you can't ask for another 3 wishes, can you? So, I mean, the first one I wrote down, and it sounds a bit boring, but I'll try and unpack it a little bit, is how do you make it a truly integrated team and environment? So what we've done in TRU is to try and create an integrated enterprise where everybody related to the programme is in the team. You know, be it the Department of Transport, Network Rail, all our partners that we work with, the train operating companies, everyone. But that's in an environment that isn't integrated. You know, the railways are federated and that makes them difficult to operate in.
Yeah.
And you know, I've just come back from a holiday in France. We've got the TGV from Marseille up to Paris, and you think this is an integrated system, and everybody here is one part of one integrated team, and you can see it. You can really see how it works, you know. We see it as well when you go to London and you get in TfL, and you think that really works, you know. And I know that's what I was trying to do on GBR, but you know, for these really complex integrated programs, if we had a world that ran around us that was totally integrated as well, our lives would work much, much better. So I'm positive about that. I think what we're doing creates that integrated enterprise, but it is not in an environment that is naturally integrated. So that would really help. So how do you genuinely create one team in the railway? And it isn't really one team in the way that it's set up at the moment. The next one would be, how do I get the best resource of people possible? Now, I know apparently there's some other railway programme down the road called HS2. But I think, you know, how would you get the absolute best people? You know, you sometimes in these programmes you just need the best people, otherwise you won't get the right answer. And if I could do, we would. It's not easy. It's really not easy. But the flip side to that is what a great opportunity to build the next generation. So, you know, the previous programs I've got, you never start with the team that you need. You never start with the team you need, but you finish with the team that you need. So we will finish with a world-class team. Yeah. Now that could sound very unfair to the people there right now, because a lot of them are world-class actually. Yeah. But have we really pulled together and made the most of the people we've got, and maybe brought in some extra help and developed the people we've got? Yeah. And we're on that journey. But if I had a magic wand, could go, Jing, you've got the best people in the world, then that would be a great thing to do.
You make such a good point there, and it's because the team will evolve, won't it, over time, and different people come to the fore at different points, and you know, learn from each other, etc. I think what the industry's known, and actually other industry sectors have known for quite a long time now, is that we've got an ageing workforce. So we've got people who are dropping off that end of the spectrum because they are due to retire, and many of them who have been due to retire for a few years but have kept going because they wanted to. But actually, there's a point. You know, I know that there's one of the guys, one of the engineers at Metrolink, is in his 70s, and it's like there's a limit here, even for even for people who want to keep going. So we've got an ageing workforce, but also what we've not been good enough at is bringing young people in at the other end, because we're not making ourselves look as attractive and as compelling a proposition for a career as we should be doing, and as we are as a rail industry. So we've got less than 5% of the workforce are age 25 and younger. So for your talent pipeline, so you need loads of people who've got experience, but also you need to be growing your own, don't you? So that you've got people with the experience you need. But as a whole, coming back to your first point, as a whole industry, we're not very good at that.
Well, and I think every engineering, Britain's a funny place for engineering. It's different having lived in Germany and France, America, where engineering is sort of a top, well-respected job. And I think we need to change that. You know, I couldn't do a job that's just, say, sit in an office for the rest of your life. And I can't get, not enough great people go into engineering in the first point. And then a lot of good people in engineering go off and do office jobs. And I know, and by office jobs, I mean, they train for 4 or 5 years to be great engineers, and they go and be accountants and lawyers. And I don't have anything against accountants and lawyers. But it wouldn't get me out of bed in the morning. No. You know, so I've lived this wonderful career where I've got to do things that nobody's ever had the chance to do. You know, I was in Standish Tunnel a couple of months ago. I mean, Standish Tunnel, if you get a chance, it's 3 miles long. It was built by hand by the Victorians. It's just an unbelievable piece of work. So I get to see and do things that most people wouldn't normally get to do. But what's for sure is if you do engineering at university, then you go get an office job, you'll never see those things. You'll never see those things. You know, you'll see a computer screen, some meeting rooms, and social media were the most exciting thing you see all day. You know, so I would encourage people to get into this. I mean, what interesting things we do. Put on your orange overalls and your high vis, and go out and see the incredible things and make a big difference. You know, what a great experience. Bit hard work, but what a great experience for young graduates to go out and run night shifts and be involved in that. Yeah.
And didn't you're involved with some early years stuff as well, aren't you, in terms of encouraging people? Yes,
we've got an early careers program that Early Careers Network that I sponsor, and that's great. I mean, I can't take any credit for it. The group set themselves up over COVID, and I said, well, this is a great thing, I'll sponsor it, and if you want to do events and conferences, I'll pay for those. But and some really great stuff coming out of it. So I think there's a passion there. So we have to bring people in, but we have to keep them as well.
Absolutely.
And creating those great experiences where people go, well, I couldn't get this anywhere else. That's part of this. And
to go and tell everybody else. Tell your friends how amazing it is as well. It's
another thing is
a tangent there, but
well, and I think linked to that is our social value program is a massive part of this. It was kicked off as a levelling up program, and the amount of work we're doing between York, Leeds and Manchester, particularly on how we develop people. We've got some pretty tough targets about recruiting locally. And talked a little bit about the competition, and there's a lot going on in the construction world and engineering world at the moment. And I think we want to recruit and retain people. We do that locally. So if you're in Huddersfield or Dewsbury and all those places, all around the north of England, we'd love to have you on the programme.
Yeah, perfect. Third wish. You've got one left.
Third wish. I wish the railways could really, really deeply invest in innovation and technology. Having come from defence, and where it goes in layers, aerospace investment, huge amounts of money in it. Rigs, technology, leading edge stuff. Ships do quite a lot, and then you get to railways, which is quite fragmented, and there's not really any big players that go, we're really going to develop world-class technology for the next generation. So we are not leading the world. We're good, but we're not leading the world. And I think without a big player in the mix that is going to develop what we're going to be doing in the next 10 to 20 years, then we'll struggle. We'll struggle. And talk about that number one wish about a truly integrated team. Well, because we're fragmented, we don't have enough scale or momentum to develop some really great stuff. Be that new rolling stock or the technologies around the railway, or how do we deliver the railway and maintain it efficiently. So I think for me, if we need a different strategy, a different way of working for really long-term innovation technology, so the UK really is world-class in railways, as opposed to what do we buy from countries that have that long-term capability and strategy. And that is something we have to really think about, and not having really big primes and big players in the mix, or Network Rail leading on that is a challenge. So we do lots of great stuff, but if we could be an awful lot bigger and better.
Brilliant. Some good wishes there, Neil. Some different ones as well. We tend to have, as you would imagine, there's a trend or a theme that goes through what people would really like. And I guess we've been having these conversations for nearly 3 years now. So people are asking for different things at different time. We started it during the global pandemic. So really interesting and thought-provoking. Thank you. Third and final part of our podcast conversation. What inspires you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you do if you need an energy boost to kind of, just rev yourself back up again?
So I think there's two bits to this. So there's what inspires you at work, and then what generally gives you energy. For me, what inspires me at work is is engaging in visible leadership. I try and do as much of that as I can, and that can just be walking the office floor plate, doing team briefs, being out on site. But spending time with the people who work for us and finding their stories and what gets them going. So basically being out there and being visible, that gives me energy. If I have to sit in front of a Teams call for too long, I kind of run out of energy.
I'll take that as a hint. We're nearly there. You're all right.
No, I thought we're on Zoom anyway. We're on Zoom. So, but we have got into days and days of meetings, and that whole question around what gives you energy, then we need to be doing more of that. Yeah. The next one's I think family. These jobs are tough. I travel quite a lot, so when I'm back, I try and spend as much time doing family time, doing stuff with the kids and with Catherine and so on. So that's a big part to me. I mean, I think nobody does these sorts of jobs and doesn't feel guilty about getting the work-life balance right.
Yeah.
So how do you spend time with the family? I mountain bike in the winter, I ski. I try and do quite a bit of sport, and I do actually listen to podcasts. Actually, I do listen to podcasts. So I wrote down there's probably two that I listen to. I'll write yours down next. I'll get into those.
I think you'll enjoy them. I do.
I'll go back through them. Apologies for that. I should have done my research. But I definitely listen to the Mark Commode film review. Just kind of switch that on. Right. And then there's one called Hardcore Histories that I listen to, which is a bit of a strange one, but that sort of unpacks some pretty challenging things that have happened in history.
Okay.
But in quite an overt way. And that I find that really insightful, because history's had a whole load of really difficult, challenging things coming to it, and that unpacks, everything from the Mongol Empire to the Second World War and everything like that. So, I think that sort of puts some of the challenges we've got in the world these days into context. So, I do that. I try and get out mountain biking every Saturday and do as much exercise as I can, which is probably not enough.
Right.
But yeah. I think the reflection on there is have I always got that right, the work-life balance in my career? Probably not. And I suppose if I was to have a chat with my younger self, I'd say you probably compromise some things between your social life and your family. You didn't need to. You didn't need to. You prioritised work over the family sometimes, when actually you thought it was important, but actually probably nobody else cared. So I try and say that to my team. I said, look, there's times when your family's far more important. Just go and do that. Nobody will notice if you miss a couple of days at work. Just tell me what you're doing. But your family will remember. Your family remember if you missed your daughter's 4th birthday or whatever it happens to be. Catherine certainly reminds me of it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So those sorts of things are important.
Do you think times have changed on that, Neil? Generally, I think, I don't know whether it's going through the pandemic and people's our world changed, didn't it? So we were spending a lot more time with family and maybe realizing what we'd been missing. And I appreciate that might not be for everybody, but I definitely feel that people are better able to balance things. I don't think there's a perfect balance, and I don't think I've ever met anyone who would say that they've got it right. I really don't. I remember being at a seminar years ago, and somebody asked, it was a women in business conference, and one of the people from the floor asked, can women have it all? And the person who was speaking was Eve Pollard, journalist, and she said, yeah, they can, just not all at the same time. So it's kind of working out what your priorities are at that point in your life, and that changes as well, doesn't it? You said as your kids are different ages and they're doing different things. And my experience with my daughter, she's 20 now, and she's been at uni for 2 years. She's going over to Amsterdam to do a year study abroad. So those years where I kind of think like, wish I'd spent a bit more time with her then, because I can't do it now. But so everything changes, and you've got to make the best of it at the time, haven't you?
I think our balance between presenteeism and understanding contribution is much better. Much better.
Yeah.
And I think, what gives me energy? Well, one of the key things that I drop on a Friday, I'm generally back at home, and I drop the kids off at school. And that kind of is quite a big thing for me. And it doesn't sound big, but it's a big thing for me.
Yeah.
And I can count on one hand, you know, when I was at Recycling Carrier, how many times I dropped the kids off at school or nursery, you know, on one hand. And I almost do it every week now. But that doesn't mean I'm working any less hard. It just means I've rescheduled my diary so that, you know, 8:30 till 9 o'clock on a Friday, I'm dropping the kids off at school.
Yeah.
And I think people are much better at that.
I think so.
But I would say I have seen a different behaviour in people in the railway. People in the railway are far more family focused, I think. When I came out of defence, now it's not a criticism of defence because there's loads of great people, but you know, my current boss, you know, if I say it's Imogen's birthday, I remember I had a conversation quite early in the thing in the job. I think I had a board meeting, a main board. He said, well, I'll just do that. You can do. Your Imogen's only ever going to have 1/5 birthday. You have loads of board meetings, and that was a great conversation. And I said that was reflected quite a lot on that.
Yeah.
Whereas previously in my old career, my previous career, I've had moments where I said, well, it's so and so's birthday. He said, well, I need you to come to this meeting.
Right.
And that's an important learning point for me.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah. And part of your leadership style as well, I know. Neil, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I knew I would. There are so many more things I want to ask you, but I'm so conscious of time. So we kind of like to keep the conversation tight so that people listening into it have got enough time to listen all the way through. So I would very much like to continue the conversation at some point in the future, perhaps when the program's got a little bit further down the line, and we might
love to do that.
An update on that. Thank you so much. I've been inspired. I've learned stuff. I found it so interesting. I lived and worked in Glasgow for a while myself, so I can listen to your accent all day long as well, to be fair. So thank you. Huge thanks from me. I know that our audience are going to appreciate hearing this career story and be inspired by you as well. So thank you so much.
That was a real pleasure. It was a real pleasure. And I'm happy to come back in a couple of years once we've got a few more stories to tell about TRU.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you so much to Neil for sharing his career story with us on this episode of the Intuitive Insights podcast.